hope I learned something. I hope I learned something. I hope I learned something from the stormy seas, from the brightest days, from the darkest nights, from the sunny days. I hope you learn something. I hope you learn something. I hope you learn something from the stormy seas, from the brightest days, from the darkest nights, from the sunny from the stormy seas, from the brightest days, from the darkest nights, from the sunny days.
Howdy, howdy, howdy. Welcome to the daily All Hat No Cattle News Rodeo. I almost said All Hat No Coos Rodeo. I am your host, Hat. Welcome everyone in the chats. Real quickly, well, I'm going to wait until Justifiable Freedom shows up. He was with me this morning during my very first podcast playthrough of The Witcher 2 Enhanced Edition, a stream that I started, by the way, with having my microphone broken for the first 10 minutes, at least 10 minutes. That was a great start, but it got fixed. But JF was trying to help me during a part where I was stuck, and I was ignoring his chats because I wasn't looking around. And so when he pops up, I'll be sure to apologize directly. But, of course, a busy show, as always. I never try to short sell you. We have some breaking news on the Duante Wright shooting. Specifically, charges have been filed against the officer involved. We will get into that. Also, there is some talk afoot of retailers no longer calling the police for quote-unquote nonviolent crimes, instead seeking other ways to dismantle such situations as shoplifting and passing counterfeit currency. We'll talk a little bit about that. A very odd article. And also have some news about Alex Navalny, the Kremlin critic, who is now on a hunger strike in a prison outside of Moscow. I have some news on his condition, which is worsening. And then in the after show, we will, of course, get into some more details on the unfortunate Duante Wright himself. A new crime attached to him has popped up. And I'll also have some stuff on the border and a little bit of COVID news. Some interesting and some really good. But I'm really looking forward to the end of the first part of the show, because I have an article from Red State that Picasso Knows provided to me that has a bunch of great points about things that are going on in the world right now, things that we need to know. There are 30 of them. I won't be able to read all of them, but I'll be sure to give you the link to the article in the chat so you can find it for yourself. But again, it's on redstate.com, very easy to find. So let's get into it. First of all, our first Babylon Bee bookend, this is one on the left, from their politics section. Biden forms commission to examine whether or not we should dismantle Constitution. And here we have a picture of 46 Asterisk himself in a very nice lavender tie, I must admit, signing yet another executive order with Harris standing behind him, wearing a mask even though she's vaccinated. Makes no sense. Dateline Washington, D.C. In response to growing requests from his base, Biden has issued an executive order to form a commission on whether we should throw out the Constitution or not. Quote, "Look, folks, here's the deal, Jack. For real this time. No more messing around. Are we really even using the Constitution anymore anyways? Maybe we can just get rid of the old thing. Maybe we can recycle it. Green. But Anyway, what was I saying? Oh yeah, they told me to sign this fancy executive thingy, so I am." Close quote. The commission will be bipartisan, equally divided between people who think the Constitution is really awesome and people who are sworn to destroy America and all of Western civilization if it's the last thing they ever do. AOC has criticized the commission as a, quote, needless distraction from the important mission of destroying the Constitution and is calling for it to be destroyed immediately so we can get it all over with. Kamala Harris also commented on the new commission, saying, close quote. The commission is expected to release a 32 billion-page report detailing all their findings after the president passes on in the next year or so. Babylon Bee, everyone. Very, very cogent as always. All right, quick look at the markets. The Dow eked up a win today, up barely $53 per share, closing below record territory at 33,730 and change. The S&P 500 and the NASDAQ were both losers. Gold also slipped. Crude oil saw a big surge, up over 4.5%. It is now sitting at $62.91 per barrel of West Texas Intermediate sweet crude. And Bitcoin has been whipsawing around today. It was briefly close to 63,800. It is currently retreated from that position, sitting at 62,218 and change. Some RIP news. Take this as you will. Bernie Madoff, the largest Ponzi scheme swindler in history, is dead. He died in a federal hospital facility, prison, in North Carolina, and he was 82 years old. He was suffering, according to his lawyers, from end-stage renal failure and other chronic ailments. They tried to get him out of prison last year to serve out the rest of his sentence outside, but the judge refused, and so Madoff died at the Federal Medical Center in Butner, North Carolina, apparently of natural causes. In case you don't remember, Madoff was running a Ponzi scheme that swindled about $17.5 billion out of clients over a great many number of years, clients anywhere from the Hollywood elite to pension funds, telling them that they had over $60 billion worth of assets altogether, when in fact there was nothing there. He was using all the money to supplement his lavish lifestyle with his wife and their two sons, and it all came crashing down. And so far, the court-appointed trustee has only recovered about $13 billion of the estimated $17.5 billion that investors had put into the Ponzi scheme. By the way, in case you don't know, the Ponzi scheme was named after an Italian immigrant named Ponzi back in the, I believe, early 1900s. And he had a scheme where he was selling stamps. And he was supposedly selling stamps worth more on their face than what he was charging, when in fact they were worth less. And so he was ripping people off, and he made I don't remember how much money he made, but he made a good bit of money and was ultimately caught. And that was the invention, at least in the U.S., of the Ponzi scheme. And he served time. So that's a little history for you there. But Madoff's been in jail since 2009. He did say he was deeply sorry and ashamed for what he did. An interesting note, his two sons are both dead. He is survived by his wife. His son Andrew died from cancer. He was only 48 at the time. And in 2010, his other son, Mark, who was 46 at the time, killed himself. I'm sure out of shame for what happened to the family name. But Madoff's wife, Ruth, survives him. Moving right along. I have a kitty on my lap, by the way, so typing in the chat is going to be a little difficult, just so you know. In fact, here's a shot of her. Right there. A little kitty cam action there. She will be resting quietly. Hopefully not nudging my hand when it's on the keyboard. All right. So, the Duante Wright shooting. We had a story break this morning. Kat, do not hit the microphone. Do not do that. The officer who shot Duante Wright, her name is Kim Potter. I should say ex-officer. She resigned from the force just the other day. But she's been charged with second-degree manslaughter. So the wheels of justice are turning. Of course, this news will mean nothing to the rioters, looters, and arsonists who are destroying cities all across this country in response to an incredibly avoidable event. Again, I'm not taking any blame away from Kim Potter. She's the one who pulled a gun instead of a taser and pulled the trigger. If it hadn't been for that, Duante Wright would still be alive. But Duante Wright resisted arrest. So he escalated the situation. He did not deserve to die for that, but he certainly contributed to it. And we'll have more on Duante in the after show. The charge is punishable by up to 10 years in jail and a $200,000 fine. Now, interestingly enough, Duante Wright's family set up a GoFundMe page to pay for funeral and burial expenses. And so far that has raised, as of this morning, almost $600,000. You may not be surprised to know that the race hustler Benjamin Crump, the quote-unquote civil rights attorney, has jumped in and is representing the Wright family. I'm sure they will be paid millions and millions of dollars for what happened. I mean, the George Floyd estate got $27 million, but we'll see what happens there. But not looking good. Not looking good. All right, let's move along. Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation. BLM GNF. We've been covering for the last few days now. Heck, we've been covering BLM for a year now. And their race hustling, their complete lack of a proper narrative when it comes to their belief that blacks are targeted exponentially more than any other race when it comes to police shootings, which is, of course, a complete and utter lie. There are zero facts to back that up. In fact, the facts show the complete opposite, that blacks are less likely to die from a police shooting than whites. In fact, officers are less inclined to use any type of force against black subjects as they are against white subjects, even though black subjects resist arrest at least 4 times more often than white suspects, up to 7 times. But BLM started on the false notion that Michael Brown, the Ferguson shooting, was shot while holding his hands up saying "don't shoot," and was killed by a white officer, when in fact we know that actually Michael Brown attacked a convenience store clerk, stole from him, and then was walking down the middle of the street with another person matching the description that the store owner had called in, and the officer, who had requested specifically to serve in a black neighborhood because he wanted to serve that community, approached Brown and the other person in the road and said, "You guys got to get out of the road." Brown tried to attack the officer, reached in, grabbed for his gun. He got shot in the finger as a result. Brown then retreated. The officer got out of the car. Michael Brown, by the way, was a huge man, absolutely huge. And there was a standoff between him and the officer. And then Brown charged the officer and got shot for that and died. But we were told through lies that Brown was actually begging to not be shot. When in fact it was the exact opposite. He was begging to be shot. I'm not happy Michael Brown's dead. I'm not happy Duane Wright, is dead. I'm not happy that Lorenzo White, the shooting here in Kenosha, was paralyzed. I'm not happy about any of that. But there's one common thread. They all resisted arrest. So BLM was started on a lie. And last year, after George Floyd died, they received tens of millions of dollars in donations. They are technically a 501c3, a nonprofit. Now we have found that one of the co-founders of BLM, Patricia Cullors, is an avowed Marxist. In fact, she calls herself a trained Marxist. And we know that the BLM network was set up in part to destroy the nuclear family, destroy all policing in America, and destroy capitalism. Yet corporate America sent them upwards of $90 million last year alone. So recently we found out that Patricia Cullors has been on a real estate buying spree since 2016. She's bought up a total of 4 homes worth over $3.2 million, including a $1.4 million estate. I have heard it described as a mini compound in Topanga Canyon, California, an incredibly white area, like 93% white. But we are told that, according to Patrice Cullors and the other BLM NGF people, that whites are out to kill all blacks, which is why you would move into an all-white community, I guess, because you explained it to me. So she's been getting hammered for this. BLM's been getting hammered for not paying out any money to the local foundations, even though they've taken in, again, about $90 million in 1 year. They're being sued. Hank Newsom, the head of the New York BLM chapter, is calling for an independent investigation into where all that money is going. And BLM came out with a statement on Monday. It's just hit the news. And they're saying that Patrice Cullors has only received a total of $120,000 since the organization's inception in 2013 for duties such as serving as a spokesperson and engaging in political education work. Patrice did not receive any compensation after 2019. Okay, so they're a 501c3, and they say that none of their money has gone towards these properties. But she's been getting paid. Now, Patrice Cullors did write a very well-selling book. The title basically saying that anyone who speaks out against white supremacy is targeted to be killed. That's the basic premise of the book. But again, that's why you move into an all-white community, I guess. But BLM is also saying that all of this negative press that is coming out is a right-wing offensive that is, quote, continues a tradition of terror by white supremacists against black activists. It's white supremacy to point out that an avowed Marxist is buying property all over the place, including a custom ranch outside of Atlanta worth $425,000. An avowed Marxist, folks, snapping up real estate. She is so harassed and so violently opposed by the white supremacist America that she made millions of dollars in a book deal and has signed a multi-million-dollar deal with Warner Communications. Because oppression, white supremacy. Try to keep track. So, moving right along with the narrative that all white cops do nothing except hunt down black men. I mean, we know that for a fact because LeBron James himself, the richest sportsman in America, tweeted out recently that he couldn't walk down the street without being worried about being killed, which is why he lives in an all-white neighborhood, I guess, because it's so dangerous. We've heard from the Democrats big time, first after the George Floyd death, and now recently they're really screaming from the rooftops that all policing should be basically dismantled. And that we need to, I believe I'm quoting former President Obama himself, we need to rebuild policing from the ground up. No one knows what that means. The Democrats talk about taking money away from police budgets and putting it towards community outreach. Why can't you take the money away from the high-paid city officials who are raking in big-time bucks through not only salaries but kickbacks and bribes? Maybe you could take some of their money and put it towards community services. But no, of course not. It has to be taken away from the police, the only people between you and crime. And we're supposed to give it to community organizers, because we all know how effective they are. You know who's a pretty famous community organizer? Former President Obama. Look how great a job he did in Chicago. Sarcasm. So again, the Democrats are calling for police to be disbanded. We've heard from, of course, Representative Tlaib from Michigan. I covered her yesterday. AOC has come out and parroted that. Of course, Ilhan Omar, not to be outdone, has also jumped in on that. And the Democrats themselves are being quite silent about it, not saying much at all. And as I said yesterday, the Democrats know that running on the defund the police narrative cost them a lot of seats in the House back in 2020, a lot of seats. And they were told, stop saying that. Stop saying socialist, stop saying defund the police, or we're never going to win again. Well, somehow they won the White House, honk honk. But they have the slimmest majority in the House in 100 years, and they technically are tied in the Senate after lying through their teeth during the Georgia runoffs about how much money they're going to give the voters of Georgia when the two Democrat senators got in office. You remember, they promised everyone $2,000 checks as soon as we get into Washington. And then 2.5 months later, everybody gets $1,400. They were told to sit down and shut up because they had already gotten $600 from Trump. So that makes $2,000. So do the math, sit down, and shut up. And I know Georgia voters are pissed. And I'd like to welcome Lee56 to the D-Life. Thanks so much for following. I appreciate it. So, in a White House briefing, Jen Psaki was asked about this call for no more policing. Now, in case you don't remember, Jen Psaki is the following. She is arrogant, condescending, dismissive, mendacious, passive-aggressive, patronizing, self-righteous, smug, and she lies. Those are all the things we know about Jen Psaki. A list that took me 45 seconds to collate alphabetically, except for the lying, which I saved for the end. So she was asked about these calls for no more policing. And Jen says, well, you know, the president, that's not his view. Quoting, the president's view is that there are necessary, outdated reforms that should be put in place, that there is accountability that needs to happen. Continuing the quote, that the loss of life is far too high, that these families are suffering around the country, and that the black community is exhausted from the ongoing threats they feel. So there's Jen Psaki, adjectives I just gave you, touting the BLM line from the podium of the Brady Room in the White House. Touting the BLM line. That blacks are being hunted by police. So there was a follow-up on that, and says, what is the president going to bring to bear if, for example, qualified immunity isn't removed from the law, if you can't get that in a bipartisan agreement? Qualified immunity, of course, being where city officials, including police officers, cannot be sued through for the administration of their duties as long as it was not done with criminal intent. So, for instance, a guy's resisting arrest, you take him to the ground, and he breaks a finger. He can't, under qualified immunity, he can't sue the officer for physical damages because the officer was using force to reply with force. If you take away qualified immunity, anytime a cop does anything that could be considered outside the bounds by the perp, they can be sued. Now, we've seen calls for this before. Unfortunately, the city officials themselves never ask for qualified immunity to be dropped from their protection, only for the police. Funny how that works, isn't it? Now, I'm not going to make an argument for or against qualified immunity. Perhaps there are some reforms that should be made. I'm not smart enough to talk about what those could be. But I will say this. You remove qualified immunity outright, and you're going to see a massive pullback from policing. It's already been readily apparent. Murders are up over 30% year to date, where they were in 2019. 30%. And shootings in New York have doubled. Chicago is on a spree of murders and shootings. Look at the lawlessness in Seattle and in Portland. Look at what's happening in Minneapolis and Brooklyn Center right now in Minnesota. These are all results of pulling back police. Police are under the impression, and I think rightfully so, that the government doesn't have their back. And so why should they insert themselves into a situation where they may have to use force, instead of watching things happen and then trying to clean up after the fact? And that's happening more and more. So Psaki answered the question about qualified immunity in a bipartisan agreement, quote, well, first, we're not going to get ahead of what the discussions are about a bipartisan agreement, meaning, of course, we'll try to go it alone. Continuing the quote, I think what Americans who are exhausted, who have suffered, who are worried about their kids and their family members should know is that the president sees racial equity as a central focus of his presidency. Racial equity, folks. That's the White House's answer to the murder rate going up 30%. And Democrats calling for the abolition of all police. Racial equity. This is by far and away the worst administration this country has ever seen. And we aren't even into the first 100 days yet. So, concerning police shootings right here in Kenosha, you remember I've talked often about the Jacob Lake shooting that happened last August. That resulted in both uptown and downtown Kenosha being destroyed. Buildings still in ruin. They haven't even started pulling away the rubble yet. Some businesses, one that was open over 100 years, destroyed, never to come back. Never to come back. I'm sorry, 98 years, pardon me. 98 years. A camera shop. One of the best camera shops in the tri-state area, and it's gone. Completely gone. It'll never reopen. The computer shop I talked about last year. PC Adventure. They destroyed the place. Ripped it to shreds. The only thing that was left was one display case. Nothing was in it. They stole everything. But the display case was still there. The walls had been destroyed. The front windows had been blasted out. Somehow they weren't able to set it on fire by the grace of God. They also weren't able to get into the back where all the tools and equipment are. Boy, you should see all the stuff back there. It's amazing. But Picasso's and I visited PC Adventure last year when I was having all kinds of problems with my monster rig here that turned out to be Google Chrome browser crashing all the time. It wasn't my hardware at all. It was Google Chrome. since I've switched to Edge, I've never had a problem. But Computer Adventure is barely hanging on still. But we finally have a ruling on the shooting. A ruling that we knew really 6 months ago, but has finally been officially released. And that is that the Jacob Blake shooting was a justified shooting. The officer involved has been cleared, has been returned to duty. The officer's name is Rustin Shesky. And he has been on duty since March 31st of this year. Quoting the news release, "I know that some will not be pleased with the outcome. However, given the facts, the only lawful and appropriate decision was made." Also, quoting the Kenosha Police Department media release, "He acted within the law and was consistent with training. It was investigated by an outside agency. There was an internal review. So that's done. That's over with." So there's justice in a little sense there. There's obviously criminal charges filed against former officer Kim Potter for the Duante Wright shooting. But what about the Capitol riot shooting? Remember, there was only one person who died from violent means during the Capitol riot on January 6th, and that was Ashley Babbitt, who was shot in the neck while trying to breach a door, I believe, at the Senate. She died at the hospital later on. We've yet to been told the name of the officer who shot her. That has still been kept secret. We have been told, though, as of today, that there will be no charges filed against the officer. The Capitol Police have said that they've done all of their due diligence in going over the details, the facts, and they have reached the conclusion that whoever this person is was justified in shooting and killing Ashley Babbitt. Now, we still don't know what the cause of death for Officer Sicknick's, Officer Sicknick's cause of death. We still don't know that. I got pulled a Biden there, pardon me. The family thinks he died of a stroke. We know that he was fine the night of January 6th. He texted his brother and said that he'd been sprayed a few times with chemical irritant like a bear spray or pepper spray, but that he was fine, and he died sometime the next day. Family thinks it was a stroke, but there is yet to be any release of any official autopsy data on why Sicknick died. We were told he died from head wounds after being smashed in the head with a fire extinguisher. That narrative ran for over a month until the New York Times finally pulled it back. There was a leak from the medical examiner's office that said they found no head trauma whatsoever. But we still don't know why he died. We do know they lied about the fire extinguisher. That was nothing more than a media narrative. Officer Sicknick was laid in state at the Capitol. First police officer to get that honor for a death of unknown causes. Now, I will say they had a very nice ceremony for the Capitol officer who died from the car ramming incident just last week, or was it the week before? They all run together now. I believe it was the week before. They had a very nice service for him, rightfully so. That was a senseless tragedy. The driver who rammed into him, killed him, and wounded another officer, was shot and killed after he got out of the car and charged the officers with a knife after ramming the police roadblock set up outside the Capitol. Funny how the Democrats weren't calling for the police to be defunded and, quote, militarized, pardon me. I just made up a word. They weren't calling for that then. I try to keep up, you guys. Try to keep up. Melissa 3838 says in the chat that poor cop won't be safe or respected by anyone in that town. He should move to another city. I don't know. I don't know, Melissa. Kenosha is a pretty good community. Pretty good community. He may be reassigned and taken out of the tough neighborhood, because there is a pretty sketchy neighborhood here in town. I know. I used to hang out at a tobacco shop right down the street from just a couple houses away from the bad part of town. It's funny how quickly things change as you move into a neighborhood. You don't want to get caught in the alley 2 blocks south of that tobacco shop, trust me. In fact, unfortunately, they're closing because of family matters. They can't stay open. They've been open for over 100 years, and now they're going to be gone. I don't know what I'm going to do with my summers now. But I think the officer will make it. But I do see your concern, and I would certainly not discount it. Certainly not. Moving right along. Censorship. You guys know I cover censorship whenever possible. Unfortunately, it never goes away. I've got a story here about game censorship. Also, Facebook and Amazon censorship coming up after this. First, though, it seems that you can't make a military shooter without offending everyone. We all know that the Call of Duty franchise has been a multi-billion-dollar franchise for a very long time. I remember playing the very first Call of Duty, which came out after Day of Honor, by the way. I believe Medal of Honor. Sorry, the Medal of Honor series. Medal of Honor was the first game to accurately portray the invasion of Normandy. It was an incredible shooter. Absolutely, it was groundbreaking. Absolutely groundbreaking. And then Call of Duty followed and took off. But the Medal of Honor series, if you can still find it, is absolutely outstanding. They did D-Day, and then they did the Battle of Stalingrad, which was absolutely amazing. I get shivers just thinking about it. Real quickly, in the Battle of Stalingrad, you started on the other side of the what was the name of that river? Was it the Dnieper? I can't remember the name of the river now. I'm sorry. Volga. That's it. Yeah, the Volga River. You started on the east side of the Volga River, and what the Soviets would do is they would take army and they would transport them by boat from the staging area on the east side of the river across into Stalingrad. And they would get off at the bay, the jetties, and they would attack into the town. But the thing is, they had more men than they had material. So they would actually give each soldier 5 rounds, and 1 out of every 2 a gun. And what you were supposed to do is charge into battle, and whenever the guy with the gun got shot, you were to pick up the gun and continue fighting. That is absolutely true. I'm not making that up. That happened. That really happened. And if you were lucky, you had 10 rounds on you. It was the most amazing piece of work I'd ever seen. And things just got better after that. Call of Duty's awesome. Call of Duty 3 is one of the best games ever made. So now there's a group. I don't have the name of it in this article by Ash Show from the Daily Wire. But it's called 6 Days in Fallujah. It's not out yet. Okay, no one's seen a frame of it. And if you're not familiar, Fallujah was the major city battle in Iraq when we invaded. It took, as the title suggests, 6 days to get rid of all of the ISIS, or I shouldn't say ISIS wasn't a thing back then, all of the local insurgents who were fighting against us when we invaded Iraq. It was door to door. It was absolute, no holds barred, door to door fighting. There's no other way to clear those streets except to go house by house. And it took 6 days. It cost a lot of lives on all sides. U.S. military, opposing military, and civilian. Everybody died in one way or another. It was a horrible, horrible event. The Marines really showed their mettle in Fallujah. They took a lot of casualties. So a video game's coming out, and it's supposed to show all 3 sides of the battle. It's supposed to show the U.S. side, it's supposed to show the opposing side, and it's supposed to show the civilian side. Again, no one's seen the frame of it yet. And already people are calling for it to be censored, for it not to be released. all because of the title. Because it says Fallujah, that means people are shooting Arabs, and Arabs are shooting at people. And that is obviously Islamophobic, which is not a thing, and it must be stopped. And it's not just people like CARE, you know, the Council on Arab American Islamic Relations, the group that is a front group for Hamas and Hezbollah, and has been for a very long time, but for some reason is still allowed to operate in the U.S. They're calling it an Arab murder simulator that, quote, glorifies violence that took the lives of over 800 Iraqi civilians, justifies the illegal invasion of Iraq, and reinforces Islamophobic narratives. Okay, again, not a frame of this game has been seen, but already CARE knows exactly what it's about, and it has to be stopped. CARE is also actively petitioning Sony and Microsoft to keep the game from their online stores, which are major outlets for games to be sold through. Major outlets. But game journalists are coming out against it too. The Houston Press ran an opinion piece basically parroting CARE's characterization of a game that no one's seen. Kotaku also is suggesting that the game should be banned. And for those of you who don't remember, Kotaku was a major player in Gamergate. If you don't know what Gamergate is, do an internet search on Gamergate Sargon of Akkad, a.k.a. D. A.k.a. AHD, I believe, actually. A.k.a. AHD. Sargon of Akkad. Even if you spell it wrong a little bit, you'll get it. Gamergate Sargon of Akkad. Do not go to Wikipedia. Do not. Wikipedia is full of lies. You read the Wikipedia version of Gamergate, and you'll think Gamergate was something made up by 4chan and right-wing extremists. When in fact, it was anything but. Oh, also misogynist, of course. So, yeah, Gamergate, Sargon, Sargon of Akkad. Check it out. So we're also being told that 6 Days in Fallujah will create an atmosphere of heightened terrorism against Arabs, against Muslims, because it's a violent video game. Again, no one's seen a frame of it yet, but we all know what it'll do to people. Of course, there's zero evidence whatsoever that any game that portrays violence has any impact on violent crime. In fact, some people have argued that gaming has actually decreased violent crime, although you wouldn't know it since people started screaming to defund the police when violent crime has shot up. By the way, notice how things haven't calmed down under the new administration? Notice how they're just as bad, if not worse, than they were last year? Any takers on that? So, I'm going to quote a part of a study from Stetson University psychology professor Christopher Ferguson. He says, the good news, and a reason to be cautious about stating such effects that video games cause violence, is that evidence for other video game effects outside of the violence realm has generally turned up very little. That's true whether we're looking at body image concerns, sexist attitudes, or pro-militaristic attitudes. In general, beliefs that fictional media can influence behaviors or attitudes is largely exaggerated. Thus, even if the game were to portray a one-sided version of the Second Battle of Fallujah, something we don't know about since the game hasn't been released, there's no clear reason to believe it would have particularly noticeable effects on players' attitudes towards Iraqi citizens. So again, you've got the narrative, and then you've got the facts. And according to the left, never the twain shall meet. You try to bring facts to the left, and they will actually get angry with you and sometimes threaten you with physical violence. Because they're so set in their narrative that any challenge of it is seen as violence towards them, is seen as literal violence towards them. Remember, words are violence according to the left. They're allowed to attack you, for wearing a MAGA hat, that's faded on the left. But if you try to give the facts about, say, the fact that blacks are shot less often in regards to police interactions than whites by a factor of 2 or 3, then you're a racist and you need to be beaten down. That's how that works, in case you're not keeping track. So more censorship. Facebook. I've been on Facebook for years, and I couldn't be happier. I was on a pretty good ammunition reloading forum, got a lot of help from it, and then I saw what Facebook was doing to its users, sites, like the gun sites, and I decided enough was enough. They had some of my data, but they weren't getting any more, and I bailed. And Gab TV, because for some reason, ExpressVPN still hasn't figured out how not to throttle upload speeds to a very good effect. It's somewhat ameliorated over before, but it's not perfect. So I turn it off when I upload. But Facebook, as you know, created something called the Oversight Board. And the Oversight Board was supposed to be an outside group of people made up of left, right, and center folks who were to review customer complaints about having content taken down or accounts suspended, and were supposed to give a non-biased judgment as to whether or not that action was appropriate. It was created in direct response to the cries of censorship that have been dogging Facebook for years and years and years. Cries that are, of course, absolutely accurate. Excuse me. Liquid IV. I love this stuff. But they're expanding it. Well, that sounds good, right? They're expanding it. It's going to be more responsive. There'll be more people to handle more complaints, because those are certainly piling up. No, that's not it at all. They're expanding it so that they can now not only try to arbitrate censorship against groups, but they're also going to start accepting requests for censorship. Now, as we all know, the right, at least up until a little while ago, did not call for censorship of anyone. The right stood by the concept of the First Amendment, and that all speech should be free and equal. Allow the better ideas to come to the front. But of course, the left doesn't believe that. The left believes in their narrative, and everything else needs to be shut down, because, again, challenging it is literal violence. So Facebook's opening the doors to the left, screaming about whatever conservative content, is left on Facebook, and dragging it off the platform and forcing it to go elsewhere. Now, personally, I think if you're still on Facebook, you're an idiot. But that's my personal view. You certainly are welcome to your own. I big time feel that way if you are a publication that has any kind of conservative leaning. I don't think you should be giving Facebook any of your money. But that's a business decision to be made by people smarter than I am. But yeah, Facebook's going to open it up so more people can be censored. Just wait. Now, let's not be unreasonable here, though. It's not just the right who's being censored on places like Facebook and Twitter. If you're an anti-war leftist, you'll get shut down too. That's happened time and time again. Certain libertarian left groups have been yanked from Twitter and Facebook and Instagram with surprising speed. So it's not just the conservative voices. It's any voice that challenges the agreed upon narrative of the left, the orthodoxy, the dogma. But it's not just Facebook. Amazon's up to it again. You remember we covered the story not too long ago about a book about the transgender explosion in this country called When Harry Became Sally, one of the great titles of all time. The book had been out for 3 years and had sold relatively well. And then Amazon changed its policy on what's allowed on the platform and decided that they would institute a quote-unquote hate speech policy. Now, as I've just been describing, as far as the left is concerned, hate speech means anything against the narrative. There is no such thing as hate speech. Period. It doesn't exist, except in the mind of the left. But they yanked the book and then published their guidelines that the book had violated, ex post facto. Remember, in American law, you cannot prosecute someone for a crime that was committed before it was made a crime. I'll never forget my example from civics class back in the 70s. If you threw away a TV into the alley, you remember there used to be things where you'd put your trash can in the alley and they would come and pick it up, and you were even allowed to burn your trash and they would just dump the ashes. Remember those days? When people would burn plastic and the whole neighborhood smelled like a landfill. But if you threw away a TV and there wasn't a law against it, but the next day they passed a law making it illegal to throw away a TV, under the ex post facto clause in the Constitution, you could not be arrested, fined, whatever, for what you did the day before it was illegal. But big tech has absolutely lathered itself in ex post facto rulings. Things that were just fine 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago, 1 day ago, are suddenly punishable. YouTube will yank videos. I'm surprised my, what's her name? I just suddenly forgot the name of one of my most popular foils when I was doing my YouTube videos. Oh, shoot. My big, fat, wonderful life, something like that. I can't remember her name now. That's fascinating. But I'm surprised my videos on her haven't been pulled down. One of those videos has got something like 150,000 views. It's amazing I can't think of her name. But Amazon's done it again. This time, they've pulled a book called Desist, Detrans, and Detox, Getting Your Child Out of the Gender Cult. And this is an article from the Epoch Times, from Daily Wire, from the Daily Wire by Tim Pierce. And this book just came out. Hadn't even sold 100 copies yet across 3 platforms. I mean, brand new book. And hadn't even gotten a dozen reviews on Amazon, and it got yanked for violating their hate speech policy. They gave no contact, no warning, no reason. That's a quote before pulling the book. Now, the reason the book was written, and I'm quoting, Partners for Ethical Care, or PEC, is a nonprofit group co-founded by the author Maria Keffler. And the group is aimed at raising, quote, awareness and support efforts to stop the unethical treatment of children by schools, hospitals, and mental health care providers under the duplicitous banner of gender identity affirmation. So that's what the book was about. The trans explosion. As you know, the number of people identifying as trans has absolutely risen exponentially over just the last few years. It used to be that mainly men would say that they were gender dysphoric and felt that they were women and would transition accordingly. But suddenly, teenage girls started declaring themselves trans and would start taking hormone therapy, testosterone specifically, growing beards, and their voice deepens, and they would sometimes have their breasts removed, called top surgery. Excuse me. Boy, I'm not going to get to anything today. It's become a huge problem. We know that many school districts have passed a policy that if a child tells a teacher that they think they are trans, that the school can refer them for transgender services without notifying the parents. We know that this transgenderism is rampant among teenage girls groups. One will declare trans, and then the next thing you know, a handful more will do the same. And we also know that many times these girls undergo these procedures and then later on regret it. They realize that they're just gender confused. Case in point, a homeless girl in England who presented as having gender dysphoria and was immediately put into the National Health Service, the NHS, and given transgender treatment, including testosterone therapy and quote-unquote gender reassignment surgery. And a few years later, she realized that she wasn't transgender. She was just confused. She was under a lot of stress. Again, she was homeless. And she is now suing the NHS for millions of pounds for damages. Now, as I always do, I put my money where my mouth is. As soon as I read the story, I went out and I bought Desist, Detrans, and Detox from Barnes & Noble. It's available in paperback. You can get it for under $20. BarnesandNoble.com. I refuse to buy books from Amazon. I will never, ever buy another book from Amazon as long as I live. There are many other outlets available out there, folks. Many others. You need to support them, if at all possible. And just in case you're wondering, you can still get Mein Kampf on Amazon. So total fair and equitable use of the rules. All right, let me skip. Had a lot there that I'm going to have to go by. Real quickly on Alex Navalny. I did tease him. Let me get to that. Alex Navalny is under Alexei. I keep calling him Alex. My bad. Alexei. That does translate to Alex. Navalny. He's undergoing a hunger strike right now. He is being held in a maximum security prison outside of Moscow, awaiting trial for trumped-up charges. He supposedly violated probation on a trumped-up charge, and they're trying to watch him die because Putin wants to execute him. Certainly wants to silence him. We know for a fact that the Russians tried to kill him last year by putting an old Soviet-style nerve agent called Novichok into his underwear. And we know this because Navalny talked to one of the guys who was actually directly involved in the plot, who thought Navalny was someone else, and spilled the beans over the phone. Told him everything they did, getting into his room, putting the nerve agent into his underwear, and then after Navalny left on an airplane on which he was supposed to die, they cleaned everything up to leave no trace. So now Navalny's in prison. He's undergoing a hunger strike. He's only 44 years old, and he is fading fast. His wife visited him. She said he's having trouble talking. He's exhausted. And she says he has lost a lot of weight. And the article gives his numbers. Navalny's 6'3" and currently weighs 167.5 pounds. I did the conversions from metric that are in the article. That gives him a BMI, which I know is a very loose description of someone's body fat ratio, but it's the only one I've got that I can use easily. And right now his BMI is 20.9. That is the lower end of normal weight, but it is not underweight yet. But again, he's starving himself. So we don't know what's going to happen there. All right, real quickly, let me get to the Red State article I teased. This is from today, written by Stu Cervic, S-C-V-R-K. You need a vowel, Stu. A name with only one vowel. You got to love it. But this is titled 30 Truisms That Will Raise Your Blood Pressure or at least Make You Think. Came out this morning. And I'm just going to do a few of them here. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. BLM thugs and the cancel culture didn't learn that simple lesson on the kindergarten playground. A tweet from Taylor Day. Things we still don't have proof for. How the pyramids were built, aliens, Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, 80 million Biden votes. Here's another tweet from Ava Armstrong. If Black Lives really mattered, they'd be tearing down crack houses instead of statues. One from Clay Travis. I love Clay Travis. Instead of mandating masks, we should have mandated exercise. And you remember that's a direct reference to the CDC study that found that nearly 80% of the people hospitalized for COVID were either overweight or obese. That is why the US and other developed countries had such a high death rate when it came to this virus, as opposed to South Asian countries like Korea and China. Although we really don't know the numbers in China, but still their death rate was lower than ours because they have a much, and Japan have a much lower propensity of obesity in their population. Obesity was one of the number one factors for getting seriously ill or dying from COVID. A couple more. This one from one of my heroes, Nikola Tesla. Of all the frictional resistances, the one that most retards human movement is ignorance. Two more. The Tricoms own the Biden regime. And then finally, from the great Nicole Arbor, one of the funniest people on the internet. Nicole Arbor is hilarious. Look her up. I think her YouTube channel is still up. She just absolutely vaulted into prominence when she did a video called, I believe, Dear Fat People, that absolutely ripped into the fat pride narrative. And she got torn down by body positive people for that. But she absolutely exploded onto the scene, and she has been a favorite of mine ever since. So that's just a few of these 30. I'll put the link to this in the chat. And again, it's on Red State. So feel free to check it out. It just came out today. There it is on DLive. There it is in Trovo. And there it is on YouTube. All right. That is it for the YouTube portion of the program. We're going to move on to the after show. YouTube, I'll be back tomorrow, 4 p.m. Eastern. Remember, there will not be a Friday show. I have 2 doctor's appointments Friday. So nothing there. And also, to let you all know ahead of time, there will not be, unfortunately, a Monday show. I have to see an oral surgeon about getting some implants in my lower jaw because this lower plate just will not stay in place. It will not stay in place. So I'm going to have to get implants. So that means I'm probably going to be down for a few days after the initial surgery. But I'll keep you posted on that. But again, that appointment is Monday. So they don't have morning appointments for oral surgery consults. I tried, but they won't see me until 2 o'clock Monday, which means there's no way I can do the show. So 4-day weekend for y'all. Okay, bye YouTube. I'll see you tomorrow. And I forgot to put up the split screen. I'm sorry. I need to do that between episodes so I know where to cut it when I cut off the second half for Gab TV. So there's that. And thank you for coming, YouTube. Bye-bye. Ba-ba-ba-ba. Ba-ba-ba-ba.